What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Probably one of the best things about old school RuneScape definitely has to be kind of like the polling system and how the community gets to control and decide the updates that get pushed into the live game. However, it does mean that actually quite a lot of new content, especially back when old school RuneScape first came out, ends up being rejected for one reason or another. And today, I wanted to take a look at items that could have ended up in the game, some of which even had development for them entirely completed, but were rejected by the community for one reason or another, and honestly most of these items could have changed the meta of the game entirely. So let's jump right into it, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like on it or let us know in the comment section below, and be sure to subscribe for some more videos. So first up, we're taking a look at some new armor sets for melee, ranged, and magic that would have consisted of a helm, body, legs, gloves, and boots. These armor sets were originally proposed as part of the Nightmare Zone release and came in both tier level 50 and level 65 variants. The main catch with these armor sets was that they would degrade during combat outside of the Nightmare Zone, requiring a recharge in exchange for the Nightmare Zone points. They were also designed to be tradable, but could only be equipped by players who had earned enough points to, well, equip them. Although this doesn't seem that overpowered at first, keep in mind that they kind of acted as like an easier to access Barrow's armor that completely replaced Rune and Dragon due to having better stats. On top of that, these armor sets provided a chance to have your health partially restored during combat, with the tier 65 version of course offering a slightly higher chance. That would make them a pretty cheap and likely more efficient alternative to Guthan's armor with lower requirements to actually use them, while also being able to use more efficient weapons such as the whip or really just anything you wanted. During the same poll for Nightmare Zone, Jagex also suggested teleport scrolls as a reward that would take you to any runecrafting altar. Since the biggest drawback of runecrafting is the time it takes to constantly run between a bank and the altar or the abyss, this would have been a massive buff to runecrafting XP rates and would essentially make it the main efficient way to train the skill. Next up, we're taking a look at some potential bounty hunter rewards that failed polls and as a result were not added into the game, starting with the Granite Clamp upgrade for the Granite Maul. Now this reward is an item that actually made it into the game eventually as it was released as a cosmetic upgrade, but the initial suggestion was actually a pretty massive stat buff for the Granite Maul. Jagex mentioned that the Granite Maul is a great weapon against Pures because they have low defense to compensate for the relatively low accuracy of the weapon, but it was essentially unusable by higher players since it ended up missing too often against players with really high defense. The upgrade would give it an extra 15 crush attack bonus and would crumble to dust after 1000 hits. Although it's true that the Granite Maul is not very effective against enemies with more defense, I mean, that's kind of true for every weapon in the game, it's definitely still one of the most broken PvP weapons in the game already by far, especially when you consider how cheap it actually is compared to some of the potential alternatives like the AGS. It was a little bit of an oversight here for Jagex to not realize that Pures don't only fight other Pures, they also fight enemies with defense such as Zerkers, and creating an upgraded Granite Maul wouldn't just make it a viable weapon for high level PKers, it would also make Pures even that much more insane against other PvP builds and would have probably just made them dominate the low level PKing meta entirely, so I have to say it's pretty good that this one didn't end up in the game. Another proposed reward was the Ring of Influence, which would increase the chance of enchanted bolts being triggered and dark vessels and souls. The dark vessel would store souls which would be released when a monster in the wilderness attacked you. When this happened, the monster would be forced to flee, so it would essentially allow PKers to PK in the wilderness around or near other wilderness monsters without worrying about being attacked or PJ'd by the mobs when they went for a kill on their opponent. Another cancelled item from this proposal was also the Amulet of Smiting, which was an upgrade for the Amulet of Glory that made Smite even stronger. Instead of an opponent's prayer being lowered by 1/4 of the damage dealt with Smite, it would drain by 1/3 of the damage dealt. Although the item was degradable, it was definitely a really overpowered suggestion and would have made bringing an expensive spec weapon to a fight a lot more risky and probably would have just led to everyone using the Granite Maul anyway. Next up on our list today is a particularly interesting one because it was actually Castle Wars bandages that could be used outside of Castle Wars. During a dev blog post about potential updates to the minigame that could bring some more interest to it and potentially bring some life back into everyone's favorite minigame from back in the day, Castle Wars, Jagex suggested adding some new rewards, including bandages that work outside of the minigame itself. Inside Castle Wars, bandages restore 10% of a player's health and 30% of their Ren energy, and they can also be used on other players to heal them for the same amounts. Although these wouldn't have been very effective as a food replacement unless paired with a Castle Wars bracelet for an extra plus 50% healing, they definitely could have been really broken in places like in the wilderness, because the main thing with these Castle Wars bandages is that you can use a lot of them really fast. You can kind of just spam a whole bunch of them in your inventory all at once without having to wait for the animation for you to finish eating like you would with normal food. It definitely would have been really OP and probably changed the meta for food items in general quite a lot, or at least for combo foods, so it's definitely no surprise that this one got rejected too. Now, it's actually been over 4 years since the skill of Artisan was suggested to potentially be added to Old School RuneScape. So at number 4, we're going to be looking at some of the items that could have potentially been added to the game with it. Now, since the skill was never voted into the game, all the suggested items that came with it ended up being rejected too. Some of the suggestions came in other forms, like two-handed crossbows in the form of ballistas, but most potential items never had any counterparts added. Among these are the esoteric robes, which gave a set effect that prevented runecrafting pouches from degrading. There were also filleted fish, which were combined with herbs to provide a chance of a special effect triggering when you ate them, and carvings that would give an extra chance of receiving an extra ore while mining when wearing the corresponding carving type. And actually, one of the most overpowered suggestions from Artisan was for wieldable Artisan tools. These were alternatives to all skilling equipment such as pickaxes, fletching knives, harpoons, hammers, etc. that were wieldable to actually save you an inventory space, plus some hobbyist or expert tier tools that would give you a higher chance to collect a resource, potentially increasing the XP rates for just about every skill in the game. Since skilling would essentially be forever buffed by these tools in general, and it would also make it kind of pointless to train just about every skill without them, players kind of decided that it was too much and just voted against adding the skill to the game. The fifth item we're taking a look at today is a particularly interesting one, and it's called the Ring of Aggression, which was suggested during the same update that added the new rings to the drop tables of wilderness bosses. The Ring of Aggression would not have dropped from Vetian, Venenatis, or Callisto, but actually would have instead been created by combining the Warrior Ring, Treasonous Ring, and Tyrannical Rings. The Ring of Aggression was kind of self-explanatory. It would actually just make monsters near you aggressive all the time, which would have made AFK in combat really easy. Players voted against the addition, noting that it would turn Slayer into an almost entirely AFK skill as long as the monsters you were fighting were just not strong enough to kill you. In the interest of avoiding easyscape, the suggestion was removed. Next up, we're taking a look at a couple of additional ring upgrades that would have originated from the Nightmare Zone. Now this one's particularly interesting because there's a decent chance that these actually might end up in the game in the future with warding. Anyway, the update at the time suggested doubling the stats of the Seers, Archer, Warrior, and Berserker rings via imbuing them, which did make it into the game, but it also suggested allowing Onyx, Dragonstone, and Diamond rings to be imbued as well. The suggestion would have given them new stats that would make them pretty strong alternatives to some of the more basic rings in the game. The Diamond Ring imbue was suggested as providing +5 to stab attack, and +4 to all other attack stats. The Dragonstone Ring Imbued would provide +5 to all attack and defense stats, and the Onyx Ring Imbued would dial that up to +6 to all attack and defense stats as well. They would have been hugely powerful and maybe even more useful than some of the Dagannoth King rings after the buff, even if they didn't offer any strength bonuses. As a result, those rings never made it past the poll. Another really OP item that almost made it into the game from the Nightmare Zone are Super Potions. It's kind of crazy to think that most of these are actually things that would have been in Nightmare Zone. Anyway, unlike the current potions such as Overload that only work inside the minigame, the Super Potions from Nightmare Zone would have worked anywhere in RuneScape. 3 Super Potions were suggested: a Super Anti-Fire Potion, an Energy Renewal Potion, and a Super Prayer Potion. Now, Super Anti-Fire Potions and Stamina Potions were introduced to the game later, although with some nerfs from the original suggestion at the time, but Super Prayer Potions never made it into the game and were just completely rejected. The idea was for them to restore an extra 4 prayer points compared to the normal prayer potion, but it would also allow you to boost 4 prayer points above your actual level. Now that's not a new feature, it's still possible with the Ancient Mace special attack, but players decided it was too powerful for just a standard tradable potion. And actually, that's just about going to cover it. I hope you guys enjoyed this look back at some of the really crazy items that never ended up being implemented in old school RuneScape. If you enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and if this video gets, let's say, 1,000 likes, I can make a second episode of this kind of video idea, because there's definitely a couple items that I didn't cover in this video. Either way, looks like that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.